All right. Hello, everyone who's tuning in and watching the recording. We are going to get started for this bathroom break live episode. Um, for those of you who don't know me, I am Dr. Shelly Leigh, based in New York City. I'm a preventive and lifestyle medicine doctor, and I help individuals and organizations with burnout. And what you're watching now, this is the Bathroom Break live series. And really, this is to create a safe space for real conversations. When we think about the corporate setting, corporate wellness, usually the bathrooms where we're having the real deep, meaningful conversations. And so that's the whole point of this series. We want to be able to talk about health and well-being topics that matter in the workplace setting to help just improve workplace well-being. So, you know, because it is May and Mental Health Awareness Month, I am so excited to have my guest, Shelby Leigh, today. She has a lot of experience when it comes to somatic psychotherapy, and you'll get to hear all about that. And we're going to be doing a deep dive into trauma and what trauma is, what it means. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Shelby on. Hello, hello.
Hi, it's so good to be
Hi.
here.
Shelby, why don't you go ahead and tell folks, give them a bit of your background because it's so rich and so interesting, I have to say too. So,
Sure, yeah. So I am a trained somatic psychotherapist. I worked in a private practice in downtown Portland for a long time, supporting folks with trauma. Trauma has been my specialty, especially complex and developmental trauma. However, these days I call myself a coach and consultant and spend most of my time teaching healthcare professionals, coaches, and therapists about trauma, how to be super trauma informed, not only for their clients to feel more held, cared for, and integrate their treatments much easier, but for themselves. So many of us as care providers in these industries tend to get really overwhelmed. You're an expert on burnout. We tend to have been impacted by maybe trauma or a lot of challenging events, and our nervous systems are just fried, out of whack, dysregulated. And so it's really my passion to support care providers to feel more balanced, more at ease, and more able to really give their gifts feeling supported. So, yeah.
yeah, that is wonderful. And I have to say, when we first met, when we first had our initial conversation, I would remember telling you that I was, I didn't know how to use the word trauma, or I was afraid to use the word trauma because in my schooling and training in medical school, you know, we equated trauma with PTSD. That was the only case or scenario that trauma existed. And so to hear about trauma being, that there is a broader, definition or understanding of it, it's so fascinating to me. So, I guess my first question is really a basic one, just in terms of, what is trauma? How do you define what trauma is?
Such a good question. And I'm so glad we're talking about this because I think so many people do equate, oh, people with PTSD who, like are war veterans or who have been through a car accident or who've had, medical trauma or violence. Those are the people with trauma, kind of putting them over there. And the reality is, the more we're learning about trauma and understanding it, is that a myriad of experiences equate to trauma. And it's not about the event, it's about how our own bodies, hearts, minds, and nervous systems respond to the events. So no two no two people could have the exact same experience around anything. We can't compare trauma. And so it's really how it shows up in the body, in our day-to-day life. And for many people, it could be something from, like an emotional trauma. People are experiencing ongoing criticism, neglect, uh, disrepair in their families of origin, or ongoing through their life, something like bullying or not belonging in a community, or something really big like experiencing like what's happening right now in the United States around I'm totally losing my words, but I want to say generational trauma, but also, you know, folks from marginalized populations, uh,
Yeah, yeah.
ongoing everyday experience of not feeling safe, held, or cared for. That stacks up. That we feel that in our body, and we're walking around feeling dysregulated, overwhelmed constantly. And many of us don't even realize that it's a trauma response and that it can be helped.
That's so I already have so many questions to ask you just based on what you just said. I mean, yeah, all of this is so fascinating to me. The generational trauma piece, trauma being passed down from generation to generation. That's something that, I just the science around that fascinates me. Um, and I get one question I have for you is how do you know if you're dealing with trauma versus maybe a difficult situation? I don't, you know, we all have really, hard times that we go through, difficult times that we go through, but what in particular makes something traumatic?
Yeah. It's anything that is so overwhelming that we cannot process. We can't stay here in the present moment. Our nervous systems experience things as a threat so much that we're not able to have, I always say, one foot on land, one foot right here and right now. We tend to get thrown back into the past. We're ruminating and thinking about the future. It's very hard to feel our feelings right here and right now, to feel our breath steady, our heart steady. We're just in a kind of overwhelmed chronic stress state. uh, Trauma tends to stick for a lot of people. And so when things feel stuck, like, oh, depression's just stuck forever, or this anxiety just won't move, or I just feel chronically depleted or chronically ill, it's time to kind of look at this might be a symptom of trauma. This might be an experience of nervous system dysregulation, and I could use some support here.
Yeah, yeah. It almost sounds like it's these residual feelings in the body, and that actually brings me to the next question that I had, which kind of relates to this word somatic or embodied. I know that for those who are in the healthcare space in the medical community, they might know these definitions. But for those who aren't familiar, can you talk a little bit more about what you're describing in terms of your nervous system and the feelings that you have in your body?
Sure. Yes. So many of us live a lot from here. We're trying to fix things, figure them out, think about things. If we could just get to the bottom of it or understand it, then we might feel better. And the reality is, it is our entire history, and actually the history of at least 4 generations before us, lives in our DNA. It lives in the cells of our bodies. And if we're not able to feel our body, interact with our body, understand how we're holding ourselves and everything we carry, it's going to take a lot longer to get through all of the pains that we're moving through and the struggles and the suffering. But when we can include the experience of the body and all that it carries, that it's been through, we have so much more space to breathe, to really tend to and embrace what we've carried, what we've been through. And an example of that might be like our guts. Many of us who've experienced especially complex or developmental trauma, we just have a lot of gut issues. And this is something that our body is speaking to us. Our body went into a survival mode. What does it do when it's surviving? It shuts down the gut to preserve resources, right? And so when we can start including, oh, the body has been experiencing a threat. My gut has been trying to take care of me. It's been doing the best that it can. It's speaking things. It needs something. It wants something. It's got things to communicate. All of a sudden, there's a mind body connection. There are things that even are wise that we can learn from these things that often we ignore or like leave our body for. This is painful. This is uncomfortable. I don't even want to be in a relationship to this because it's unpleasant. But when we can just start tending a little bit to these things, first, like we get to understand, oh, my body holds a lot, but then it also holds a lot of pleasure and joy and ease and freedom. So when we have access to the experience of our bodies, we have access to the entire spectrum of our humanness. But it can be very overwhelming, especially for folks with a lot of trauma, to even imagine going into the body, because it's we survived by leaving the body, by like, nope, not going there. And so we go little by little to welcome every part as it shows up, every sensation, while the whole time taking special care around letting the body experience something that feels soothing or comforting or supportive. We don't just go right into the pain. That would be too much.
Yeah, yeah. No, there. That's you said so much good stuff right there, and the point in particular about folks not wanting to, not wanting to pay attention or, you know, wanting to ignore it, wanting to ignore the sensations. I hear that a lot with with the patients and the clients that I work with too. It's really difficult to, to sit with your emotions. It can be so uncomfortable. And a lot of times I feel like just, growing up, we're taught not to do that. We're taught to maybe even do the exact opposite, to kind of get over things. I guess, how are some ways that you work with folks or work with folks in the past to kind of help them start this process of just tuning in a little bit? Because I imagine it takes practice to be able to do that.
Absolutely. So the way I do it is very, very gentle as possible. I think we've already all been through too much. I'm not interested in pushing into discomfort, pushing past edges. I don't believe we need to be uncomfortable to heal or grow. And so I just start with my eyes instead of go like in as deeply as I can to feel my body. My eyes are part of my body. It's a present moment experience. And I might just explore my present moment, looking for anything in my environment. You can do this with me if you want, that feels soothing or supportive or pleasant. Maybe it's just interesting, like there's this cool texture here, and this
Mm.
brings us into the experience of, oh, I could have in my present moment something that doesn't hurt. Usually it's, I don't want to tune in because something will hurt. It's like, okay, let's start there. Is there anything that doesn't hurt? And as we start tuning into our bodies, if that feels safe enough, we can go, oh, okay, that breath, that doesn't hurt. That feels okay. Or the tip of my elbow or the tip of my earlobes. It's just like neutral. Let's start with neutral. Sometimes when we go too fast into what feels amazing, some alarm bells will go off for certain people. And so we just kind of tiptoe in and go, how about this much? Could we take 3 breaths with that? And then off into our day, and then, oh, 3 more breaths. And imagine what taking even 3 breaths a day with something that was pleasant or just doesn't hurt could stack up and create. It starts stitching together a bunch of micro moments that feel okay. And then our body starts to respond. Oh, it's safe to feel okay. I don't have to be stuck in stress or survival. That's a past experience. Does that make sense?
That definitely does. I love I love this aspect of the micro moments and starting with, not necessarily, okay, well, what feels great, but what doesn't hurt. Let's take the baby steps here. Um, and being able to kind of start with your surroundings, your environment too. Not necessarily having to go right, deep within. And I love that idea of just of settling into one where one is.
Yeah. And I'm often shocked by how quickly this works. So many people are like, that's dumb. That's too simple. There's no way, with the amount of pain and discomfort I feel, like, give me something else, right? Give me something big. And the nature of trauma is that we kind of tend to seek intensity because that's something we've been used to. And so introducing things like micro moments and things that just don't hurt, that feel neutral, it's boring, right? But we want to start feeling safe enough to feel bored, to feel curious about things that aren't so intense. And so a phrase I'll use is, it's safe to feel this. I don't say that to my clients necessarily, but I let my clients say that to themselves. It's safe to feel this. I'm bored, or I'm restless, or maybe there's even a little pleasure here, and just practice that.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, what you mentioned in terms of intensity, that the body, if we experience trauma, that we grow accustomed to our emotions or the sensations in our body being so extreme that kind of, taking your foot off the gas pedal a little bit and feeling just the more I guess the less obvious or the more subtle sensations. That's a really interesting point too.
Right? It could be such a threat to try to help a client or a patient try to slow down, because if they've been in that seeking, stressed, gotta protect mode, even if it's unconscious, it's going to be like pushing against something really big if we try to go too much too fast. And so it's like, all right, we're just going to take the foot off the gas, just like 3%. Can you handle that much?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like again, these micro moments, it's like just reminding oneself that you are okay, in this moment, in the present right now. You actually are okay, and finding the evidence for that, whether it's, I think you mentioned the elbow at one point, it's the elbow, just how does the elbow feel, or just different things in the surroundings. That makes a lot of sense. Um, and kind
Yeah.
of on this, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
And I just want to acknowledge the parts of us that don't feel okay. Even though we're like,
Mm.
okay, the door's locked. I'm in my home that feels safe, pretty safe, or really safe. And there's still a part that might not feel okay. So we get to have that part,
Mm.
and we get to have the part that might be able to be open to things being okay right now.
Yeah, it all is okay. It all is welcome
Yes.
and there. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That's so so good. Well,
Mhm.
as a healthcare provider professional, and for others who might be coaches or therapists, what I guess what are some tips or suggestions that you have for individuals so that they can better help their patients and clients when when it comes to something like trauma? And I'm guessing that the first step is to be able to identify it, but yeah, I'd just love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, that is a great first step. And instead of even needing to figure out how to identify it, I tend to just assume everybody walking through my door, they've been through hell and back. They have
Mm.
been through so much, especially in these last few years. Nobody has walked through these last few years without experiencing some trauma. People's nervous systems are dysregulated. I'm just going to imagine that even if they look like they're fine and engaged and have it all together, that something's going on under the surface that they might not share with me quite yet, because we're still building trust and they might not even know. And so I'm just going to meet everyone that walks through the door with absolute presence and care. And when things arise, maybe they start feeling mad at me, or maybe the treatment plan isn't working, or maybe they're super people pleasing, whatever the thing is, I'm going to lead in my head, my mind, and my heart with whatever they're doing makes absolute sense. Because folks with trauma tend to be received with, you're too much, I don't get you, that doesn't make sense. Why? Like this kind of, it's a lot of judgment that people get when they so much is happening inside, and so they don't feel safe to share much, because they don't want to have that response they get from pretty much everyone and anyone in their whole life. And so they're doing a lot of micromanaging. So when I'm have that orientation of whatever arises here, it just makes so much sense what comes up, and every part is welcome. Just like you said, all is welcome. Those are my first couple of ways that I'm trauma informed or trauma aware. And the second is working on my own stuff, supporting myself
Mm.
to know my own nervous system, because if a client with a lot of trauma and overwhelm walks through the door, it's going to light stuff in me, and I'm going to turn into a people pleaser, and I'm going to want to help, and I'm going to feel really bad about myself if I can't, and I might want to blame it on them for not getting better. And that's my own dysregulation and trauma response. So I have to just be able to regulate myself, stay in my center, and lean into my support community. So those are the best ways I know how.
No, that is wonderful. And it's reminding me again of our initial conversation. I remember talking to you about my own experience with having experienced loss, my mom having passed away from cancer when I was in college, and then going into medical school and starting my medical rotations and finding myself in situations where, I mean, I literally would have to step out of the patient's room because I was so I just felt so overwhelmed by emotions because something that the patient said or did or something in that room reminds me of that experience of losing my mom or her being sick, and uh, and I didn't know what was happening. I told you this too. I many times thought that I needed to drop out of medical school because I didn't think it was, I didn't think I was fit for it. Yeah, and so that was really difficult to try and navigate and figure out. But it sounds like, I mean, what you're describing. I wish I had known all of this and heard all of this at that time, because it really was a hard thing to go through. And I'm sure I'm not the only healthcare provider who's had an experience like that. You know, yeah, I'm sure you have stories of this too.
Absolutely. And the numbers, I wish I could remember the number. It was so big that I blacked it out of healthcare providers that have experienced trauma. And it's one of the biggest populations who have experienced trauma, because not only are you managing your own history, your own life event, but there's vicarious trauma that you're witnessing. And the way many of the systems, especially in the US, are set up, it's not supportive to be able to process what you're witnessing. And the mentality is just push past, muscle through, deal with it later, be strong enough. And that's just trauma stacked on top of trauma, on top of just old school patriarchal conditioning. And so many of my individual clients who I see for trauma resolution are nurses, doctors, OBGYNs, and midwives. And I hear the stories, just like you shared, again and again and again, where they just feel taken out and they can't tell anybody. And they just keep powering through. And then they get referred to me, and they didn't even realize what they were experiencing was trauma, and that their body was remembering things from their history, from maybe the way that they were raised, or losing somebody, or having or witnessing something horrific. And it just kept getting lit up and lit up again and again, to the point where they just couldn't even imagine continuing to work. And I feel so sad about that, because our healthcare workers are the most important in the world. And I want them to be getting regulation support is just so key. And I know there are so many people that are working hard for that. I won't be able to do it alone, but it's such a passion.
Yeah, I mean, especially everything that we've been through the past couple of years with COVID, the pandemic. I mean, yeah, what would you, if you, if you were the head of a healthcare organization, or if you had some say in terms of how to support the clinical staff, those who have boots on the ground, what can you do on that more broad scale?
Yeah. Well, the reality of what trauma informed care actually means, it's about the system as a whole. It's not about one
Mhm.
person at a time. And so when we kind of zoom out, it has to be the entire staff, everybody from receptionists to janitors to techs to everyone, PA, doctors, nurses, everybody in the entire clinic needs a network, a circle of support, places where they can lean in, places where they can share knowing they won't get fired if they have to process something, places where they know they're not alone. People can tell each other's stories, and there's space and time to just put it down. Whatever people have gone through. I work with some ER doctors and in a really supportive system, and I hear that they get to come out of those awful, awful events and they get to go process together. People bring them like flowers and food, and they get to sit down and just look at each other and say, yes, that happened. Like just that
Mm.
would be revolutionary. That doesn't happen very much, which is just stunning to me. But to be able to look in each other's eyes and say that happened and we were there and let's slow down and what do you need? That much is so key, right?
I'm just trying to picture that happening in the hospitals that I've been in, and that never happens. you never you never get that moment to just pause, or like you said, acknowledge that what that collectively everything that was just seen, witnessed, heard, that it was traumatic, that it was you know something that deserves some pause and reflection on. That never happens. It never happens.
That could take 5
Crazy.
minutes. I think people think it needs to take a day workshop or a big retreat, and it's like just 5 minutes to catch your breath together and look at each other in the eye, right? And so it's again those micro moments start getting stitched together, and it's just a grand acknowledgement in the system of this is big, and we are acknowledging it, and we see you and we're supporting you, and there's 1,000 ways to do it, but those are a couple.
Yeah, yeah. I think, like you said, again, it's as simple as just acknowledging. Looking the other person in the eye. Validating that, okay, this was a lot, and then being able to kind of take it from there. It makes so much sense. So much sense.
Yeah.
Um, we are. We could go on. We could go on. I could keep talking to you about this forever. I just find it so fascinating, but I want to make sure that people can get back to the work that they have in their busy days. But tell us where we can find you, or what resources you have to offer for individuals.
Yeah. So I know a lot of the people you work with are healthcare professionals. So one of my main courses that's online, it provides continuing education credits, AMA level 1 and 2, all of the things, is creating saferhealthcare.com. And it's an online course, but I also show up live monthly for office hours to just offer added support. So that's one way to find me. And for people who aren't healthcare providers, creatingsaferspace.com is for coaches, therapists, other facilitators. You can find me on social media, LinkedIn, all the places. My website is shelby-leigh.com. I have so many hats. I'm always doing trainings and speaking and 1,000 things, just trying to get trauma informed care across the world because it means so much to me.
No, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for all this work that you're doing, all this information and knowledge that you are bringing up to the surface, so that we can acknowledge what's going on around us. I think it's, again, yeah, so, so important. I'm so glad that you were able to join me today. Folks who know me can reach me at shellybowman.com. But again, Shelby, thank you so much for spending this half hour with us,
Mm,
and hope I get to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much. Yes, this is the second time we've gotten to hang out. I love the podcast that we recorded on my podcast. I hope there's just lots more in the future.
Amazing. Yes. All right. Well, take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.